The vast emptiness of space lit up with the sudden appearance of the UES Defender, a human military vessel that glided through the darkness like a metallic shark. On its bridge, Captain James Miller stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. "Sir, we're picking up a distress signal," reported the communications officer. "It's coming from the neutral zone, bearing mark 227. Miller nodded, his expression remaining neutral even as his interest peaked. Distress calls in the neutral zone were rare. Most species avoided the area due to its unclear jurisdictional status. "Show me the signal pattern," he ordered. A holographic display shifted, revealing an elegant but unfamiliar pattern of pulses. The ship's AI took mere seconds to analyze it. "Signal matches Stellar Empire protocols, specifically their royal frequencies," the AI announced in its calm voice. Miller raised an eyebrow. The Stellar Empire, the most formal and protocol-obsessed species humanity had encountered since reaching the stars. What were they doing out here? "Take us in," he commanded. "Alert medical and emergency response teams. Standard rescue protocols." The Defender smoothly changed course, its engines humming with barely contained power. As they approached the coordinates, they found a sight that made even the veteran crew pause. A royal vessel, its elegant purple-gold hull now scarred with damage, drifting helplessly in space. Aboard the damaged vessel, Princess Rose struggled to maintain her composure. Her antennae, delicate sensory organs that marked her royal bloodline, twitched with barely contained anxiety as she watched the human ship approach through the viewing portal. "Your Highness," her chief advisor whispered, "perhaps we should wait for our own rescue vessels." Rose's four-fingered hand gripped her ceremonial staff tighter. "We have no choice," she said, her melodic voice carrying the weight of royal authority despite her youth. "Our life support systems are failing. These humans are our only option." The word humans caused visible discomfort among her entourage. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as efficient but unpredictable. Barbaric, some would say. They had no respect for the intricate dance of royal protocols that governed civilized space. The Defender's docking procedure was swift and precise, lacking the usual ceremonial approaches required by royal protocol. Rose felt each clank and thud of the connection process, each sound making her antennae quiver. When the airlock cycled open, she steeled herself for the encounter. Her royal training had prepared her for thousands of diplomatic scenarios, but very few involved humans. She expected them to burst in, loud and chaotic. Instead, Captain Miller entered with controlled precision, his team moving with disciplined efficiency. He was tall for a human, his uniform neat but showing signs of practical wear. His eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in the ornate decorations of the royal vessel, along with the obvious damage. "Your Highness," he said with a short bow, not the proper 17 seconds required by protocol, but not entirely ignorant of courtesy either. "I'm Captain James Miller of the UES Defender. We're here to help." Rose felt her heart race at this direct address. No formal introductions, no proper titles, no ceremonial exchanges. Yet there was something compelling about his straightforward manner. "Captain," she managed to reply, her translator converting her musical language into standard human speech. "We appreciate your prompt response to our distress signal." Miller nodded, already gesturing to his medical team. "We detected hull damage and life support failures. My team needs to begin emergency repairs immediately. With your permission, of course," he added, almost as an afterthought. Rose's antennae twitched in shock. In her culture, at least 3 hours of ceremonial greetings would precede any such actions. But the practical part of her mind, the part she usually had to silence to maintain royal dignity, recognized the wisdom in his haste. "Granted," she said, surprising her advisors with her quick response. As the human crew moved into action with impressive speed and coordination, Rose found herself watching Miller. He moved with purpose, giving clear orders that his team followed without the usual ritualistic acknowledgments her people required. It was terrifying, fascinating, and somehow thrilling all at once. As she observed their efficient work, a small part of her wondered if perhaps there was something to learn from these humans and their direct ways. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger adventure. Princess Rose watched in barely concealed horror as Captain Miller's crew worked on her royal vessel's systems. They moved with quick efficiency, but their methods violated at least 37 sacred protocols. The worst part was that she couldn't deny their effectiveness. "Your Highness," her chief advisor, Blue Leaf, whispered in their native tongue, "these humans are touching the sacred engine cores without performing the ritual of mechanical blessing." Rose's antennae twitched in distress. She knew the proper response would be to demand they stop and perform the 3-hour ritual. However, the practical part of her mind, growing stronger by the minute, noted that the human engineers had already restored 40% of their failing systems in just 1 hour. Captain Miller approached them, his boots making unnaturally loud sounds on the ornate floor. "Your Highness, we've identified the main problem. Your engine's quantum stabilizer was deliberately tampered with." The human's direct statement caused gasps among her entourage. Such matters should be discussed only after proper ceremonies and in the presence of royal investigators. Yet here was this human, bluntly stating facts without any ceremonial cushioning. "Captain," Rose began, struggling to maintain her royal composure, "such matters require proper—" A loud explosion from the engine room interrupted her. The ship shuddered, and warning lights flashed across the walls. Without hesitation, Miller grabbed Rose's arm to steady her, an action that caused her guards to draw their ceremonial weapons in shock. Touching royal flesh without permission was punishable by death in their culture. "Everyone stay calm," Miller ordered, releasing Rose but showing no fear of the guards' weapons. "That was just a power surge. My team's handling it." Rose found herself caught between traditional outrage and practical necessity. The human had violated sacred law by touching her, but his quick action had kept her from falling. Her antennae were practically vibrating with confusion. "Lower your weapons," she commanded her guards, surprising everyone including herself. "The captain acted to ensure my safety." Blue Leaf looked ready to faint. "But Your Highness, the sacred laws of contact clearly state that the preservation of royal life takes precedence," Rose finished firmly, recalling an obscure subsection of the law. She noticed Miller's slight smile and felt her outer scales flush with an embarrassed purple hue. Over the next few hours, more protocols were broken than in the entire history of her family line. Humans ate their meals while working, a shocking violation of the sacred meal ceremonies. They spoke directly to royal staff without proper introductions. Worst of all, they seemed completely unaffected by the horrified looks they received. "Your Highness," Miller said, approaching her again after supervising repairs, "we need to discuss security arrangements. Until we know who sabotaged your ship, you'll be safer aboard the Defender." Rose's antennae went rigid with shock. "Leave my royal vessel," without performing the ceremony of vessel transition. "Your Highness," Miller said patiently, "with all due respect, whoever sabotaged your ship might still be aboard. Security should come before ceremony right now." Rose felt her world spinning. Everything she'd been taught about proper behavior clashed with the obvious logic of the human's words. She looked around her damaged ship, at her nervous entourage, then back at Miller's steady gaze. "How long would this transition take on your ship?" she asked carefully. 10 minutes, Miller replied simply. Blue Leaf nearly collapsed. The shortest recorded royal vessel transition in history took 3 days. Rose straightened her posture, making a decision that she knew would shock her people but felt strangely right. "Captain Miller, we accept your offer of sanctuary aboard the Defender." "We will." She paused, her antennae quivering slightly. "We will adapt to your ship's protocols during our stay." The look of approval in Miller's eyes made her scales flush purple again, a reaction she found both embarrassing and intriguing. As her entourage began their traditional wails of protest, Rose realized that her adventure with these fascinating humans was only beginning to get interesting. The attack came without warning. 3 pirate vessels dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. Inside the UES Defender, alarms blared as Princess Rose and her entourage were enjoying their first informal meal, a concept that still made her antennae twitch uncomfortably. Multiple hostile contacts. The ship's AI announced. Energy signatures match known raider vessels. Captain Miller's response was immediate. Battle stations. All civilians to safe zones. Princess, please follow Security Team Beta Tow. I will not hide, Rose declared, standing up. Her royal training demanded she show courage, even as her inner scales trembled with fear. My people must see their princess remain strong. Miller looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded sharply. Stay close to me then. The first blast rocked the ship. Rose watched in amazement as the human crew sprang into action. There were no ceremonial battle prayers, no ritual weapon activation sequences, just pure coordinated efficiency. Return fire, targeting their engine cores, Miller commanded. Launch countermeasures. And get me a channel to these idiots. Rose's antennae curled in shock at his casual language about combat. In her culture, battle was a formal dance of honor, with specific rules and protocols. The humans, however, seemed to care only about results. The pirates' leader appeared on the main screen, a scared creature from the outer rim. Hand over the princess, and we might let you live, it growled. Miller's response was not diplomatic. Here's my counteroffer, he said, pressing a button. The Defender's main guns roared, splitting one of the pirate ships in half. Anyone else want to negotiate? Rose felt her scales flush with a mix of horror and excitement. Such direct action would be considered barbaric in her court, but she couldn't deny its effectiveness. The remaining pirates responded with a coordinated attack. Energy beams sliced through space, some hitting the Defender's shields. The ship shuddered, but held firm. Their shields are adapted to standard Empire weapons, Miller explained as he worked his console. They're not ready for human innovations. Watch this. He activated something called a gravity pulse, a weapon Rose had never seen before. The pulse caught one of the pirate ships, crushing its rear section like a fruit in a giant's hand. The last pirate vessel tried to escape, but Miller's crew was ready. They executed a maneuver that seemed to defy physics, spinning the Defender in a way that made Rose's inner gravity stabilizers queasy. The final shots were precise and devastating. The entire battle had lasted less than 10 minutes. That's impossible, Blue Leaf whispered, clutching his ceremonial staff. A proper space battle should take at least 6 hours, with proper forms and... A proper battle is one you survive, Miller interrupted, checking damage reports. Sometimes the best ceremony is staying alive. Rose found herself nodding before she could stop herself. She watched Miller work, noting how his crew responded to subtle gestures and short commands. There was a beauty to it, different from her people's elaborate ceremonies, but beautiful nonetheless. Captain, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. Your methods are unorthodox by our standards, but I cannot deny their effectiveness. Perhaps, she paused, aware that her next words would shock her entourage. Perhaps you could teach me some of your tactical approaches. The silence that followed was deafening. Blue Leaf looked ready to perform the ritual of mental cleansing on her. The other advisors were frozen in horror. Miller studied her for a moment, then smiled. Happy to, Your Highness. First lesson. In combat, like in life, sometimes you have to trust your instincts over your rulebook. As Rose's entourage began their predictable protests, she felt something changing inside her. The rigid patterns of her royal training were beginning to crack, revealing something new and exciting underneath. Looking at the debris of the pirate ships floating in space, Rose realized that perhaps the humans' direct approach had more merit than her people had ever admitted. It was a dangerous thought, and she found she rather liked it. Princess Rose stared at the evidence displayed on the Defender's main screen, her antennae twitching rapidly in distress. Captain Miller stood beside her, his face grim as he pointed out the details of the sabotage they'd discovered. "Look at these tool marks," he said, zooming in on the damaged quantum stabilizer. "They match standard Empire Royal Maintenance tools. This wasn't random pirates. It was someone who had access to your ship's inner chambers." Rose felt her scales pale to a light blue of shock. "You mean, someone in my own court tried to kill you?" Miller finished bluntly, earning gasps from her advisors. "Yes. The pirates were probably hired as a backup plan." Blue Leaf stepped forward, performing the gesture of diplomatic interruption. "Captain, such accusations require the proper ceremony of investigation, followed by the ritual off." "We don't have time for ceremonies," Miller cut in. "Whoever did this is still out there, possibly planning their next move." Rose watched the growing argument between her chief advisor and the human captain. In the past few days, she'd seen Miller break almost every royal protocol, yet each time his direct approach had saved lives. Now, faced with treachery from within her own court, the old ceremonies felt less like tradition and more like chains. "Blue Leaf," she said suddenly, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "Captain Miller is right. We must act quickly." Her entire entourage froze in shock. Even Miller looked surprised at her directness. "Your Highness," one of her guards protested, "the sacred laws of investigation clearly state." "The sacred laws also speak of survival," Rose interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "Captain, what do you suggest?" Miller's approval was evident in his slight smile. "We need to check the maintenance logs, interview your crew, and—" A sudden explosion rocked the ship, cutting off his words. Alarms blared as smoke began pouring from a nearby ventilation shaft. "Security breach in engineering," the ship's AI announced. "Unknown intruder detected." Without hesitation, Miller grabbed Rose's arm and pulled her behind a console, just as plasma bolts sizzled through the air where she had been standing. Her guards raised their ceremonial weapons, but the attacker, wearing Royal Maintenance Crew uniforms, had already taken cover. "Your Highness," the attacker called out in their native tongue, "you've been corrupted by these humans. The royal line must remain pure." Rose felt anger replace her fear. All her life, she'd followed the rules, performed every ceremony, maintained every protocol. And now someone was trying to kill her in the name of those very traditions. She watched as Miller coordinated with his crew through subtle hand signals. No formal command structures, just efficient, silent communication. The humans moved like water, flowing around the attacker's position. Making a decision that would horrify her royal ancestors, Rose reached down and removed her ceremonial ankle bells, symbols of royal dignity that announced a princess's presence with gentle chimes. For the first time in her life, she moved in complete silence. While the attacker was focused on the humans, Rose crept around using a maintenance passage Miller had shown her earlier, another protocol violation she was now grateful for. She emerged behind the attacker just as Miller's team began their distraction. With movements that would have scandalized her etiquette teachers, Rose swung her ceremonial staff, not in the prescribed arcs of royal combat, but in the direct, efficient way Miller had demonstrated during their tactical discussions. The attacker went down hard, unconscious before they hit the floor. Silence fell over the bridge. Her entourage stared at her with a mixture of horror and awe. She had violated at least 15 sacred combat protocols. She had moved without her royal bells. She had struck someone from behind. The ultimate dishonor in royal combat. And she had won. "Nice work," Miller said simply, emerging from cover. "Though we should probably discuss your grip on that staff. Could be more efficient." Rose found herself laughing. Another protocol violation. But as she looked at the unconscious attacker wearing her own royal uniforms, she realized something important. Sometimes survival required breaking the rules. "Captain," she said, "I believe it's time for more of those tactical lessons you mentioned." Her entourage's collective groan was music to her ears. The message from the Royal Council appeared on the Defender's main screen, making Princess Rose's antennae droop with anger. Her cousin, Prince Stone, stood with perfect ceremonial posture as he delivered his speech. "Beloved cousin," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern, "the Council has determined that your time with these humans has rendered you unfit for the throne. For the good of the Empire, you must return home immediately for purification rituals." Miller, standing beside Rose, noticed her scales turning a deep red, a sign of rage in her species. The princess had changed much in the past weeks. Gone were many of her ceremonial robes, replaced by a practical uniform that blended royal colors with human military efficiency. "Cousin," Rose replied, deliberately ignoring 17 required ceremonial greetings, "how interesting that you claim concern for my fitness, just as we've discovered evidence linking the assassination attempts to your supporters." Prince Stone's perfect posture slipped for a moment. He hadn't expected such directness. It wasn't the royal way. "These accusations require proper investigation ceremonies, spanning no less than 3 lunar cycles." "We found your personal seal on the orders," Rose interrupted, making her entourage gasp at this breach of protocol. She nodded to Miller, who displayed the evidence they'd gathered. "Quite sloppy, cousin, leaving such obvious traces. Perhaps you spent too much time studying ceremonies and not enough on practical matters." Miller suppressed a proud smile. The princess had learned human-style investigative techniques surprisingly well. She'd even suggested checking the computerized records instead of waiting for the traditional paper trail ceremonies. "This is outrageous," Stone sputtered, his own scales turning pale. "Blue Leaf, surely you cannot support this barbaric behavior." All eyes turned to the chief advisor. Blue Leaf had been the strongest voice for tradition, but the recent events had affected him too. He stepped forward, performed a perfect third gesture of official declaration, then said simply, "The princess' lives. That is more important than ceremony." Rose felt warmth spread through her scales. She'd feared losing her people's respect by adopting human ways, but perhaps she'd underestimated them. "The Royal Council has already voted," Stone snapped, dropping all pretense of ceremony. "Return home for the purification, or be declared unfit." "Interesting proposal," Rose replied, allowing a small human-style smile to cross her face. "I have a counteroffer." She nodded to Miller again. The captain pressed a button, and dozens of documents appeared on the screen. Evidence of Stone's corruption, his deals with pirates, his attempts to weaken the Empire's defenses, all gathered through very unceremonial but highly effective human methods. "A copy of this data is being transmitted to every noble house in the Empire," Rose announced. "I learned from the humans that information flows faster than ceremony." Stone's face showed pure shock. There should have been announcements, ceremonies, proper procedures, but Rose had simply acted, just like a human would. You can't," he stammered. "I already have," Rose replied. "And when the houses see how you've betrayed our traditions of honor while hiding behind ceremony." She let the implication hang in the air. Miller stepped forward. "Your Highness, we're receiving responses from the noble houses. They're quite interesting." The screen filled with messages of support for Rose. Many houses had apparently been waiting for someone to challenge the suffocating grip of excessive ceremony. They saw in Rose a leader who could preserve their culture's heart while allowing it to grow stronger through change. "Cousin," Rose said to Stone's increasingly pale image, "I suggest you prepare for some very traditional justice ceremonies. I hear the ritual of imprisonment is particularly thorough." After Stone's image vanished, Miller turned to Rose. "That was well done. Though I notice you couldn't resist adding that ceremonial threat at the end." Rose's scales flushed purple with amusement. "Some traditions are worth keeping, Captain. The trick is knowing which ones." She touched the human-style command insignia now pinned beside her royal crest. "Now shall we discuss how to modernize the Empire's defense forces?" without a 17-hour ceremony first. Her entourage's collective groan was much weaker than usual. They were learning too. The grand throne room of the Empire's royal palace had never seen anything like this. Princess Rose stood before the assembled noble houses, wearing a uniform that blended royal colors with human military practicality. Captain Miller and a small team from the Defender stood nearby, their presence causing whispers among the traditionally minded nobles. Prince Stone, now in chains, was led before the gathering. He had demanded the traditional ceremony of accusation, a process that normally took 3 days. Rose had other plans. "My fellow nobles," she announced, skipping the traditional 4-hour opening speech, "we face a choice today. Maintain our rigid adherence to ceremony while threats grow around us, or adapt and become stronger." Gasps echoed through the chamber at her directness. Stone saw his opportunity. "You see," he called out, "she has abandoned our ways. The humans have corrupted." "The humans," Rose interrupted, causing more gasps, "showed me that tradition should protect our people, not endanger them." She nodded to Miller, who activated a holographic display. Another breach of ceremony that made several older nobles clutch their ceremonial staffs in shock. The display showed Stone's conspiracy in clear detail. Battle plans, deals with pirates, weakened defenses, all hidden behind layers of ceremony and protocol. "While we spent 6 hours blessing our ships before each patrol," Rose continued, "raiders slipped through our borders. While we performed the ritual of communication before every tactical message, our enemies moved freely. Stone didn't corrupt our traditions. He hid behind them." The chamber erupted in argument. Some nobles supported Rose's words, others defended the old ways. Stone's supporters moved to surround him, hands on their ceremonial weapons. Miller tensed, but Rose held up her hand. She'd learned from him that sometimes the best strategy was letting your enemy make the first mistake. Sure enough, Stone took the bait. "Guards," he shouted, "enact the emergency protection protocol." Several guards moved, but not as he expected. Instead of protecting him, they surrounded Rose, the true royal heir. Stone had forgotten that even emergency protocols required proper recognition of rank. "Now," Stone screamed to his hidden supporters. A dozen nobles drew weapons, but Rose was ready. She pressed a small device on her wrist, a human technology integrated into her royal armor. The energy shield sprang to life around her and her loyal guards, deflecting the first attacks. "Captain," she called calmly, "demonstrate the efficiency of human tactics." Miller's team moved with practiced precision, while Stone's supporters were still trying to organize their ceremonial attack formations. The humans had already disabled half of them, using non-lethal techniques. Rose herself moved like water, combining her royal combat training with Miller's practical lessons. Her ceremonial staff, now reinforced with human technology, deflected energy bolts as she advanced on her cousin. "You're breaking every combat protocol," Stone screamed, retreating. "No," Rose replied, sweeping his legs out from under him with a very unceremonial move. "I'm creating new ones." The battle ended in minutes instead of the traditional 6 hours. Stone and his supporters were disarmed and captured. The noble houses watched in stunned silence as their princess helped Miller secure the prisoners. Another protocol violation that somehow seemed right. "My people," Rose addressed the gathering, slightly out of breath but standing tall. "Look around you. We just prevented a coup in minutes instead of days. We captured traitors without a single death, and we did it by combining our traditions with new ideas." She walked to the ancient throne, its surface inscribed with thousands of years of ceremonial law. But instead of performing the traditional seating ritual, she simply sat down. "The stars are filled with wonders and dangers," she continued. "We can hide behind our ceremonies until they overwhelm us, or we can adapt. Learn. Grow stronger. I choose strength." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Blue Leaf, to everyone's surprise, stepped forward and knelt. "The throne recognizes wisdom," he said, "even when it comes in unexpected forms." One by one, the noble houses knelt, recognizing their new queen, one who could bridge the gap between tradition and progress. Miller caught Rose's eye and gave a slight nod of approval. She returned it, her scales flushing slightly purple. They both knew this was just the beginning of bigger changes to come. Queen Rose stood at the observation deck of the newly christened Royal Defense Station, watching as human and Empire ships conducted joint training exercises. A year had passed since the Battle Royal, and the changes she'd implemented were transforming her civilization. "Your Majesty," Miller said, approaching with his usual direct manner. Now serving as the official human Empire military liaison, he'd been instrumental in modernizing the Empire's forces. The new hybrid patrol ships are performing above expectations. Rose's antennae twitched with pleasure. The ships represented everything she'd worked for. Empire technology enhanced with human innovations, crews from both species working together, combining ceremony with efficiency. "Captain," she replied, noting how her scales still flushed slightly purple in his presence, "I believe this calls for a celebration. Perhaps we could combine the traditional Feast of Achievement with your human barbecue concept." Miller grinned. A year ago, such a suggestion would have caused diplomatic incidents. Now, it was just another day in the new empire. Blue Leaf approached, carrying both his ceremonial staff and a human tablet computer. "My queen, the noble houses have approved the new educational exchange program. Young nobles will now spend time training with human military academies, while human officers will learn our cultural traditions." Without the usual 3 months of debate ceremonies, Rose asked, amused. "We used your new emergency decision protocol. Only 17 hours of discussion instead of 3 months. Blue Leaf's tone was dry, but his antennae twitched with hidden humor. The station's viewing window showed their success. Empire ships now moved with human-like efficiency, while maintaining their elegant design. Human vessels had adopted some Empire technologies, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive purple-gold alloys that were stronger than either civilization's metals alone. "Report from the border patrols," a young officer announced, performing a shortened version of the traditional greeting that took seconds instead of minutes. "Pirate activity has dropped by 80% since implementing the joint patrol system." Rose nodded with satisfaction. By combining human tactical unpredictability with Empire precision, they'd created something new and powerful. The pirates never knew if they'd face a traditional Empire response or human-style improvisation. "There is one small problem," Miller said, his voice serious but with a hint of amusement. "The human crews are becoming too fond of some Empire traditions. My security chief now refuses to start her shift without performing the morning ritual of vigilance. And my royal guards insist on learning human coffee rituals." Rose replied, sharing his amusement. "Perhaps we're creating an entirely new culture." A flash of light drew their attention to the window. A new ship was emerging from the Empire's shipyards, the first of its kind, designed and built by both species together. Its hull bore both human and Empire markings, its crew a mix of both civilizations. "The Harmony," Rose said softly. "First of the bridge-class vessels. Combining the best of both worlds," Miller added, standing perhaps a bit closer to her than strict protocol would allow. Neither Blue Leaf nor the other advisors commented on this breach anymore. The ship's launch would traditionally require 7 hours of ceremonies. Rose had modified it to 30 minutes, keeping the most meaningful rituals while adding human elements. As they watched the preparations, she reflected on how far they'd come. "You know," Miller said, "when we first met, I never thought I'd see Empire ships performing tactical maneuvers or human crews participating in ceremonial blessings. And I never thought I'd see the day when my people would appreciate human directness," Rose replied, "or when I'd prefer a simple uniform to traditional robes." Blue Leaf cleared his throat. "The nobles are ready for the launch ceremony, my queen, and the human crews have prepared something called champagne for their traditional aspect." Rose smiled, her scales shifting to the deep purple of joy. "Then let's not keep them waiting. After all, She added with a hint of human-style humor, "Efficiency is part of our traditions now." As they walked to the ceremony together, Rose and Miller exchanged glances. Their accidental meeting had changed both civilizations for the better, creating something newer and stronger than either had been alone. It wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a greater one. And somewhere in the royal archives, a new set of protocols was being written. One that began, "Tradition is not a cage to restrict us, but a foundation to build upon."